You're walking down a busy street. Someone collapses 20 feet ahead of you. 40 people are around. You wait. You assume someone else will help, so does everyone else. Nobody moves. This isn't a flaw in your character. It's not coldness, and it's not cowardice. It's a switch in your brain that flips the moment a crowd gets large enough, and almost nobody knows it's happening to them. The real answer is far stranger than people don't care anymore. In March of 1964, a woman named Kitty Genovese was murdered outside her apartment building in Queens, New York. The story that spread afterward claimed 38 witnesses watched the attack and did nothing. That number turned out to be exaggerated, distorted by sloppy reporting and a city eager for a morality tale. But the case caught the attention of two psychologists, John Darley and Bib Latané, and what they built from it has shaped how scientists understand human behavior for 60 years. They asked a question nobody had really tested before. Does the presence of other people make you more likely to help in an emergency or less? Your intuition probably says more. More people means more hands, more eyes, more chances someone steps in. That's the assumption almost everyone makes. It's also wrong. Darley and Latané ran an experiment in 1968 that became one of the most replicated studies in social psychology. Participants sat alone in a room, speaking through an intercom with other participants they couldn't see. In reality, those other voices were recordings. During the conversation, one voice began to choke and gasp, clearly in distress, calling for help. Here's where it gets strange. When a participant believed they were the only other person on the call, 85% of them got up and reported the emergency within a minute. When they believed 4 other people were also listening, that number dropped to 31%. Same emergency, same sounds of distress, same amount of time to act. The only thing that changed was how many other people the participant believed were also listening. More witnesses, less action. Researchers named this the bystander effect, and at its center sits something called diffusion of responsibility. Here's the plain version. When you're the only person who can help, the responsibility sits entirely on you. There's nowhere for it to go. But the moment you believe other people are also watching, that responsibility splits. It spreads thin across everyone present. And here's the part that should unsettle you a little. Nobody decides not to help. Nobody consciously thinks, someone else will handle this, I won't bother. The diffusion happens beneath conscious thought. You feel less personally obligated, and you don't notice the feeling arriving. There's a second mechanism running alongside it, and it's just as quiet. Psychologists call it social proof, but the simpler way to understand it is this. You watch other people to figure out how to feel. If you see something that might be an emergency, but nobody around you is reacting, your brain uses their calm as evidence. Maybe it's not actually serious. Maybe you're overreacting. Maybe that's just how this scene is supposed to look. Everyone is doing this calculation at the same time, watching everyone else's stillness and interpreting it as information, when in reality everyone is just as frozen and just as uncertain as you are. A room full of people waiting for someone else to move first can end up being a room where nobody moves at all. Put those two mechanisms together, the diffusion of responsibility and the social proof, and you get a strange kind of math. Add more witnesses to an emergency, and instead of increasing the odds someone helps, you can drop them sharply. The crowd doesn't multiply courage, it dilutes it. Why would a brain ever evolve to work this way? This is where the story gets older than New York City, older than psychology labs, older than cities altogether. For most of human existence, you lived in small groups. 40, 60, maybe 150 people, according to research from anthropologist Robin Dunbar on the natural limits of human social groups. In a group that size, everyone's actions were visible. If something went wrong and you didn't act, people noticed. Your reputation, your standing, your ability to be trusted by your tribe, all of it depended on the fact that responsibility couldn't hide. There was nowhere to diffuse it to. Your brain calibrated itself to that world. It learned that being watched by a small, known group meant personal stakes were high, and inaction was costly. It never had to develop a separate setting for the strange new situation that modern life created, a situation where dozens or hundreds of strangers might be present, none of whom know you, none of whom will remember your face. Your ancient brain is still running calculations built for a tribe of 60. It's just been dropped into a city of millions, and it doesn't know how to recalibrate the math. There's something else hiding underneath this entire story, something most people miss completely. Bib Latané's later research suggests the bystander effect isn't really about indifference at all. The people in those studies weren't apathetic. Many of them showed visible signs of distress, sweaty palms, racing pulse, genuine anxiety about the choking voice on the other end of the intercom. They cared. They were paralyzed by uncertainty, not numbed by apathy. Caring and acting turned out to be two entirely separate systems, and a crowd can sever the connection between them without anyone feeling like they've made a choice to look away. This is where the experiment gets even stranger. Latané and Darley didn't stop at the intercom study. In a follow-up, they had participants sit in a waiting room filling out a questionnaire when smoke began pouring through a vent. Alone, 75% of participants got up, found someone, and reported it within minutes. In a room with two other people who had been instructed not to react, only 10% reported it at all. Some sat there as the room filled with haze, glancing sideways, coughing, but staying seated, because the calm strangers beside them seemed to be saying, with their stillness, that nothing was wrong. What's remarkable is how convincing that silent signal becomes. Afterward, when researchers asked participants why they hadn't acted, almost none of them said, "I assumed someone else would handle it." Instead, they reframed the situation entirely in their own minds. They told themselves it probably wasn't real smoke. Maybe it was steam from a building vent. Maybe this was somehow part of the study and they weren't supposed to react. The brain doesn't just suppress the impulse to act. It builds you a tidy explanation for why staying still was the reasonable choice all along. You walk away from these moments believing you read the situation correctly, when really the situation read you, and a crowd of calm faces wrote the conclusion for you before you ever stopped to think. Once researchers understood the mechanism, they started testing whether it could be reversed. And it can, with something almost embarrassingly simple. If you ever need help in public, here's what actually works. Don't shout, "Somebody help me." Pick one specific person. Look at their face. Say their description out loud if you don't know their name. You, in the blue jacket, call an ambulance. That single act collapses the diffusion instantly. Responsibility no longer has anywhere to spread to. It lands on one person, the way it would have landed on the only other voice in Darley and Latané's intercom experiment. Hospitals and emergency responders now train people to do exactly this, because it consistently produces faster results than a general call for help into a crowd. It works because it rebuilds the small group conditions your brain was originally calibrated for. The moment you name one person, you've recreated a tribe of two. There's nowhere left for the responsibility to hide, and no other calm face to read as evidence that nothing is wrong. The crowd is still there, 40 people deep, but for the one person you pointed at, the crowd has effectively disappeared. They're back in the world your ancestors lived in, where their action or inaction was the only one that mattered. Psychologist Robert Cialdini found something similar when studying what makes people comply with requests. Specificity collapses hesitation. A vague request gives a vague answer, or no answer at all, because nobody is quite sure if it applies to them. A specific request, aimed at a specific person, with a specific task, removes every excuse the brain might otherwise manufacture. It's the same principle showing up in a completely different field, decades later, confirming the same underlying truth about how diffusion gets broken. Here's where this stops being a story about emergencies and starts being a story about you this week. Think about the group chat where everyone saw the message asking for help moving apartments, and nobody replied, assuming somebody else would. Think about the online thread where a person clearly needed support, and 40 people scrolled past, each one trusting the other 39. Think about the meeting where everyone noticed the obvious problem and nobody said anything, because surely someone with more authority would bring it up first. Think about the comment section under a video where someone says something genuinely alarming, and 1,000 people see it, and not one of them reports it, because surely with 1,000 people watching, somebody already has. None of that is a modern character flaw. It's the same 60,000-year-old circuitry, just running on Slack instead of a sidewalk. It even shows up in places that feel nothing like an emergency. Researchers studying online behavior have found that the larger an audience appears to be, the less personal responsibility any individual member feels for responding at all, whether the stakes are a stranger in distress or simply a friend who posted something quietly sad. Scale doesn't just dilute heroism. It dilutes the small, ordinary kindnesses too, the ones that used to be impossible to avoid when your entire social world was 60 people who would notice if you looked away. You're not less compassionate than people who lived in small ancient bands. You're carrying their exact wiring, dropped into rooms far larger than anything that wiring was built to read. The instinct to glance around and calibrate your response by everyone else's stillness, the quiet sense that your individual action matters a little less when so many others are also watching. None of that disappeared with technology. It just found new crowds to hide in. You're walking down a busy street. Someone collapses 20 feet ahead of you. 40 people are around. This time, you already know what your brain is about to do. You point. You speak directly to one person. You say their description out loud. And just like that, the math breaks in your favor.